Most universities believe they have a visibility problem. What our research shows is far more uncomfortable. The real problem isn't visibility, it's discoverability at the moment of intent. At Thrivematic, we analyzed over 200 private and deemed universities and over 110,000 pages across Google Search, AI platforms like ChatGPT, website performance, and very specifically how admissions information is presented to a student who actually wants to apply. What we found is this: a student may find your university, they may even trust your brand, but they often cannot figure out how to apply without friction. That gap between interest and clarity is where universities quietly lose revenue, enrollments, and credibility. This episode is about that gap. I'm Noella. With me today is Sandeep, founder of Thrivematic, who built the underlying analysis system that essentially developed this report, an AI assisted, cross validated diagnostic framework designed to be reproducible, auditable, and rigorous. It's the kind of internal system that most universities don't realize they are missing. Sandeep, let's start at the beginning. Before we get into the tools and the scores, I want to ground this in why we did this at all. Every university we speak to says some version of we need better SEO, we need better rankings, we need better visibility, but those are symptoms, not causes. Sandeep, what was the problem we were actually trying to solve? What did we want this research to reveal that typical SEO audits just don't?
Yeah, thanks, Nola. A great question to start off. I think one of the issues that we have noticed working with a leading private university in India is this accumulated technical debt tends to be invisible. And by the time the internal team notices it, it's often too late and the debt is too large, and therefore significant effort is required to address some of those issues. Because most of the attention always tends to go towards something that's visible on the website, either a page that isn't looking right, social media content that isn't sounding right, things of that nature. And so while those are things that we, of course, also look at, we used this extensive research to uncover what could be some of the underlying issues in an effort to identify what might be inhibiting um, the student from actually getting the information that they want. So that is directly related to admissions, which is one of the primary goals of any private university website. The other being their brand building that the website plays a role in. So keeping these two things in mind, we looked at how the digital presence of these private universities across many different channels, and also in particular the admissions user experience that a potential student might have. And so keeping this in mind, we analyzed various parameters.
When you first started designing this research, what was the core question you wanted the data to answer?
Yeah, I think we wanted to have not just gut instincts and our experience telling us that these are the things that often get missed out, but also look at it industry wide and see what are some of the common patterns that teams often try to ignore and neglect, which will show up when you do a research of this scale. And we're looking at close to 200 universities, private universities and deemed universities that we have looked at in depth in this research. And yeah, we've uncovered some interesting patterns, some exceptions along the way.
I want to also add a behavioral lens to this because this is the part that most people tend to skip. Discovery behavior has changed. Students don't browse the way they used to. They scan, they compare, they bounce fast. And AI is now a layer on top of that. What it says about your institution can shape perception before a student even lands on a website. Plus, there's a second pressure that Indian universities can't ignore anymore. India is opening up to foreign university campuses under new regulatory frameworks and reporting. There are about 17 odd foreign universities that have plans to begin operations in India from 2026 onwards. So, this research, in my opinion, wasn't only about who looks good online, it was also about who removes friction at that decision making moment. That's the difference between marketing and conversion. So before we go deeper, I want to be very clear about who this conversation is for because there are two very different audiences listening. First, there are decision makers, vice chancellors, CEOs, deans, directors. You may not be technical, but you care about outcomes, applications, enrollments, reputation, long term competitiveness. The second layer is the executors. Now, this is heads of digital marketing, website teams, brand teams. You see the gaps every day, you know what's broken, but you don't always have the mandate or the budget or internal clarity to fix it. So, this conversation that we're going to have is built to speak to both of these audiences, evidence for leadership so that you can get funding and support these pieces, as well as priorities for executors so that they can sort of push all of these pieces out and start addressing them periodically. Now, let's talk scope of this analysis and report, because this wasn't a lightweight audit. Sandeep, can you give us a headline view first? When you say we analyzed, the digital presence of all of these private and deemed universities and you benchmarked them, what exactly did we measure?
Right. So I think we looked at multiple properties. One was, of course, the websites, and we also looked at the microsites websites that are for different campuses for each university. And then specifically in that website, we looked at all the admissions related pages. We analyzed them across multiple dimensions in terms of content completeness, content depth, what is the UX and navigation like, and the technical parameters. Then we also looked at how these brands or these universities are discovered and found online. Google search or traditional search is still a dominant channel. And so we looked at that. We also looked at the up and coming search channel, which is the AI based search. And we looked at ChatGPT in particular and what is the AI visibility of these universities when people search for them. We also looked at how they show up on social media, in particular Reddit. That's a platform where the demographic of students who might be applying to these universities are most active on. And so we looked at what is the presence of these universities, what is the sentiment there, and then also we looked at the technical aspects of the website in general, which influences SEO, AEO, and GEO to a large extent. And so we looked at multiple of these dimensions, and like I mentioned earlier, we looked at almost 200 universities. So the scale was broad, and we also went deep across many of these dimensions.
So I'll just break this down simply because it helps to understand what makes this so comprehensive. We effectively looked at 5 things: search visibility, that is, where universities show up on Google and how stable those positions are. The second is AI visibility, what ChatGPT says, sentiment, and what topics it consistently covers. The third was website performance, so lighthouse performance plus SEO and accessibility signals. The fourth was Reddit sentiment, not as marketing, but as authentic reputation signals. And the fifth was admissions discoverability. We had a 100-point framework covering content completeness, depth, UX, navigation, and technical excellence. Sandeep, could you walk us through how you built this so it doesn't become data theater, so to speak?
Right. So we are living in the age of AI, and it lets you do things that weren't possible in the amount of time that we have taken to do this and the scale and depth. But we were able to build a research agent using AI that looked at publicly available data from the own properties of these universities and the presence of these universities and the mentions that they get on the digital sphere, whether it's Reddit or whether it's AI like ChatGPT and search results. And then we were able to pull all of that data, collate it, synthesize it, then run multiple checklists, build a scoring system, and applied that consistently for every university. And then we were also able to map out all of this visually and in a table to look at which university does well on what parameter, who are the competitors for each university. So we were able to collect extensive data for all of these universities, whether they are private universities in India or the deemed universities in India. And then we were able to run a research audit to ensure that the data we've collected, the scoring system that we've built, they can all stand the test of accuracy, and also ensure that we can reproduce these reports. And another thing that we also did was to ensure that we can trace back to the source to ensure that we are citing the right data point in the insights that we have been able to gather from this.
And without getting technical yet, could you walk us through the main dimension of the analysis? in simple language, explaining the ranking systems, the grading, the portals and the platforms that we considered.
Right. So at this point, maybe I'll bring in some of the reports which we will publish on our website. We have a overview of the research that we've done. While we looked at, let's say, more than 100 private universities, 90 of them are unique in terms of the university taking into account the different campuses that they might have. And we were able to build a scoring system like you talked about for admissions, comprising of the content completeness, content depth, the UX, and the technical excellence on a 100-point scale. And one of the things that we've noticed is both across private universities and deemed universities, categories of universities seem to do well in general on admissions, particularly on their website. But this is no surprise given how important this is for every university. And so a lot of effort seems to have gone in optimizing this. And then we also looked at visibility score, the AI visibility. Lighthouse is basically Google's page performance and page speed framework that you can use to look at the what is called the core web vitals. We also looked at using the same tool, what is the SEO score for each of these websites. And then we also looked at the Reddit sentiment. By scraping data and analyzing the sentiment, we made use of multiple LLMs and agents to be able to do this for both private universities and deemed universities.
So, because universities, I'm sure, are tired of vanity dashboards, a lot of them want diagnostics that they can defend internally. So, I want to underline the credibility layer here. This research went through methodology audits, design, data collection, statistical checks, reproducibility. This matters because universities are tired of opinions. They need diagnostics they can defend internally. So, Sandeep, when you designed this analysis and you designed this report, it wasn't intended to be just another SEO report, but a system leadership can actually trust. Can you walk us through a little bit of that thinking and how it all came together?
Yeah. And I think just again going back to the scale and depth of the report, I think we were able to look at more than 100,000 pages across all the universities and the content on all of those pages. And so that's a lot of data that we were able to crunch and look at. And that allowed us to get insights into, you know, what are the common patterns, like I said, but also things that certain universities are doing well, things that are often missed out by other universities. Those are things that signals that we were able to pick up in our research. And the scroll depth, um, and overlaying that with the scoring mechanism, applied this consistency across all universities. So we were able to benchmark and provide this data set that is reliable for universities to to be able to make decisions on.
And I want to summarize that what I'm hearing here because it's important. We didn't only look at visibility. We looked at visibility, we looked at stability and clarity. Because ranking once doesn't matter. What matters is whether a student finds you, trusts what they see, understands what to do next. Now, most universities break at step 3. So let's move into findings, starting with search. Let's start with Google. Most universities will hear the first insight and think, oh God, we're doing fine. And that's exactly the problem. Sandeep, what did we learn about branded search performance?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we looked at was the top 10 search results for a set of queries related to each university. So multiply that by 200 universities. And so we looked at tens of thousands of search results. And what was clear was that the branded search, most brands tend to rank in the top spot for their own name, which is expected. If you're not, then that's an issue that you need to address on priority. But most of them seem to have good brand strength, which makes everything further down the line a lot more efficient for the university in terms of admissions, etc., because it reduces the friction when you have a strong brand. We also looked at the non-branded intent, right? Which is where your user experience and content structure becomes important. So things about eligibility, deadlines, fees, that's those are things that are important to also look at, not just ranking for your branded term. While a lot of the universities rank at the top spot for their own brand, what we noticed was that the rest of the positions, the top 10 search results are actually quite volatile. While the branded terms are stable, what we call long tail keywords related to admissions in particular uh, seem to fluctuate a lot. So is not just somebody searching for your brand name, but somebody searching for, let's say, a program name plus admissions as the keyword query. There is a lot of fluctuation there. And what used to happen is a lot of education portals, not the university websites, but sort of the blogs or directories in the education space used to rank really high. But what we've noticed is a lot of them are now not showing up at all. And this is a result of a algorithm update that Google has done in the recent past. This has been seen in other industries as well, but definitely we have noticed it looking at the data here for the education industry. So you appearing on search, not just from your own property, which is your own website, but also appearing through other properties is a great signal for others that this is a trusted brand. Now, some universities may have done work with these education portals to show up on search via these other portals, but now these portals are not ranking themselves on Google. So that's an important thing for universities and marketing teams in them to make a note of. And and there's a lot of variation and fluctuation in those search results as well. That doesn't involve the branded terms and the university's own website. So what does this mean? How do you then adjust your online strategy for visibility, for search, for SEO is something that we'll look at in subsequent podcasts. But this is definitely something that stood out.
So, this is essentially the uncomfortable part. Ranking number one for your own name is table stakes. It doesn't mean you're winning discovery. So, let's just talk about what actually reveals risk. What did SERP stability and volatility tell us about how fragile those positions really are?
Yeah. So I think one key concept that the marketing teams in these universities need to understand is not just ranking for the top position, which is 1 out of the 10 positions, right? Or showing up in AI searches. If you look at the top 10, the top 20, or showing up in ChatGPT or AI overviews of Google and other platforms where you can be discovered, think of all of them as your surface area. The number one position in Google search is just one spot on that surface. And just focusing on that one spot and neglecting the other rest of the surface area, you're losing a lot of potential opportunity. And so to look at this holistically, you need to look at the surface area and how do you show up in this online visibility. And when you look at this as a surface area, how much of that surface area do you cover when somebody looks for either your university specifically where you should dominate, or when they look at general queries related to admissions to programs, how much of that surface area do you cover in comparison to your competitors? I think that is very, very important, and not just looking at, the number one position on Google search or showing up in ChatGPT responses.
So, this is essentially where leadership tends to underestimate the shift. Search is no longer static. Social platforms now occupy meaningful real estate. Your Instagram, your LinkedIn, your third party mentions, they're not supporting channels anymore. They're part of your search footprint. Students don't experience your marketing in channels. They experience it as a sequence of trust checks on one screen. Now, let's talk about the layer most universities aren't really ready for: AI visibility. Because students don't just Google anymore, they ask questions. When we analyze ChatGPT responses, what stood out to you most?
Yeah, I think we have a separate report for this, by the way, where we've looked at universities that show up in ChatGPT in particular, and here's just a quick preview of the universities, the number of words that we looked at, and then analyze the sentiment in those words to see how many words per university, and how does ChatGPT, spit out the responses when you ask questions related to each university. So we pre-programmed certain questions related to every university, depending on the kind of university, and then looked at the response from ChatGPT. And we did this for all the universities. And then we were able to figure out certain patterns. And one of the things that came out, the topics that was most commonly found in the responses, often centered around fees, eligibility, deadlines, what are the application steps, what are the required documents, who are the contacts. These are the topics that most often ChatGPT seem to include in their responses, which could also be an indication of the kind of questions people are asking. So yeah, so that was interesting. Yeah.
So, You scored AI visibility high. What does a high AI visibility score actually mean? And what does it not mean? What's the nuance in this specific piece?
Right. So one is just looking at how much AI knows about you, and that in itself is a great indicator of how clear is your information on your website primarily, because that's one of the key sources. Plus any other online properties, whether you have a Wikipedia presence, whether your social media profiles, etc., um, are providing consistent, coherent information, which then these LLMs can scrape, make sense of, and have a good understanding of who you are, what programs you offer, what is your fees, etc. So that when somebody's asking these questions, they can actually give that information. And so the more they know about you, the better they understand you, the easier, the more relevant or more useful that information that ChatGPT can generate and provide when somebody is asking those queries. And how do you provide this information and these signals so that ChatGPT can get a good understanding of you? I think that's a separate podcast in itself. We've touched upon it briefly in some of our previous podcasts of what you can do, but I suppose that is a separate conversation altogether, which we'll tackle at some point in the near future. Also, what happens is, when this information is weak, in the sense the information signals are weak to ChatGPT or any other LLM based search, the responses then tend to be, because these are AI search engines, they generate the response. They're not simply providing you a link to a resource that Google search would do. They're generating the response. The responses then tend to become very generic because they don't have concrete information. They will omit the details like the dates, the fees, the contacts. And also we've seen AI tends to sometimes make up information. So if there is no accurate information, structured data, and FAQs on the website that are providing very specific answers to specific queries that the audience might have, and if ChatGPT doesn't have access to that, then it's going to either give you generic information or worse, make up things that may not be accurate or relevant to the audience of your university.
So here's the future facing part that I want universities to really hear. AI doesn't create reputation from nothing. It synthesizes what the web already signals. So universities can't treat comms, research visibility, outcome stories, and partnerships as nice to have. They have become and they are becoming input variables. AI does not invent reputation, it summarizes signals. So if your placements, research, industry partnerships, and outcomes aren't clearly documented online, AI won't see them either. This isn't futuristic. This is already shaping perception. Now, let's move away from polished platforms for a moment. Reddit is messy, but it's honest. Sandeep, what did Reddit analysis tell us about student sentiment and presence?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's raw, it's messy, and chaotic. It's a great, it's a gold mine for universities to look at how students are thinking, how they are discussing, things related to admissions, fees, the campus, and all of that. And so we obviously decided that we will use the data from Reddit related to all the universities and see what shows up. It's great for uncovering pain points and the brand perception. How do students perceive the brand? One thing is for the PR and the website to say certain things about what the university stands for, but how is it actually perceived on the ground? And Reddit is a great place for that. And so we were able to pick up these kind of signals, sentiments, and look at things like what is the clarity in the process for admissions, right? Is there a lot of confusion? How difficult or easy is it to fill up a form? What is the campus specific nuance and discussion that's happening within for a particular university? And then we were able to use a sentiment analysis, run that across the data to figure out which university had an overall positive sentiment, which had a mixed sentiment, and which ones had a negative sentiment. And so we were able to get that kind of information as well. Which is there in our another report called the Industry Insights Report, which looks at the digital presence of all the universities, what is their AI visibility and social discussion, which we are talking about now. And so we had information about Reddit, positive, negative sentiments, and also mixed sentiments. So there are nuances there of what people are talking about for each university.
So specifically about the industry, insights report, what struck me here is not positivity or negativity, it's absence. Most universities are invisible in the spaces where students talk freely. So that doesn't seem to be a marketing gap. That's a student experience signal, right? And I want to clarify something for executors listening. This isn't about doing marketing on Reddit. It's about improving student experience. So advocacy emerges and then monitoring those conversations like a reputation pulse. Students trust imperfect truth from peers more than polished claims. Now, if we move to the next bit, this part is, in my view, the most commercially important piece: admissions. If there's one section every university should listen to twice, it's this. Sandeep, could you explain the admission scoring framework and what it measured?
What we did was, when we were looking at universities across the different categories, we said, yes, we need to look at the digital presence. So what is the overall website looking like? How is it discoverable, etc. But obviously, at admissions, like you said, is um, always the area of main focus for universities. And while we said earlier, most universities seem to be doing well in terms of the score, it's not just that, but what are you not doing, or vis-a-vis your competitors, what are the gaps? But first, to answer your question, what did we measure? Looked at all of the university websites, and then we zeroed in on the admissions section of the website and said, how much content do they have related to admission? How complete is that content? Does that content address key things that are needed from a student's perspective when they're looking at applications? What are the fees? How transparent is it? What is the eligibility criteria? How clear is that information? Are the deadlines clearly mentioned? Is it easily accessible? Who are the contacts if they have queries? Is the process clearly and visually represented on the website? So we gave a certain amount of weightage to what we call content completeness. Then we looked at the content depth specific to programs and campus. Then we looked at FAQs that could answer real questions. So how deep is the content related to admissions? Is it just a single page that says, here are all the details and here's the form? Or is there more nuance to it? Is there more depth to it? Then we also looked at the UX, the user experience and navigation. Can you find, for example, fees and eligibility within 1 to 2 clicks? So we looked at that aspect. We looked at, if you have multiple campuses, do you have selectors? Can you easily look at the different campuses? Then there was also this idea of, is there a clear path to the application and the forms? How easy is it to access and fill out and so on? And then finally, we looked at the technical excellence, which is, how does the website, particularly the admission section, show up and work on mobile, right? We looked at using Google's page speed scoring mechanism. How does the website, in particular the admission pages, load on a mobile phone, right? What is the delay? What is the order in which it loads, etc. And we looked at the sitemaps from an SEO standpoint. Do they have schema? Do they have breadcrumbs, FAQs, and also some basic accessibility standards? Are they followed on the website? And so across these 4 dimensions, we were able to look at the pages, and the kind of pages that we looked at also were application pages, fees pages, deadlines related pages, requirements, financial aid, and then see how much of pages are there for each of these types of categories of pages. And so this was the admissions flow analysis that we did for each university.
So I want to slow this down because this is where money leaks. Students don't think in institutional silos. They don't care about which department owns what page. They ask, can I apply? Am I eligible? When is the deadline? What will it cost me? If they can't answer those in minutes, they leave. So this is not a UX issue. This is a conversion failure. And the truth is, when a student can't find requirements or deadlines quickly, they just don't think this is a content issue. They think this is a place that's absolutely disorganized, or I'll figure it out later. And later usually means never. Admission is not just a department, it's a conversion journey. Every click is a drop in intent. So, Sandeep, what were the biggest gaps which we saw consistently, and what surprised you the most about all of this?
Yeah. And I think the first thing that we found, the biggest gap, was around fees and eligibility. And we also correlated this because this is the same thing that also showed up in Reddit analysis, things that people are talking about most often. The same thing on ChatGPT. And if the fees and eligibility related content is more than 3 clicks deep, then I think there is an issue that you might want to look at. The other is if there are very few FAQs or missing FAQs around frequently, the most commonly asked things. And this is something the admissions team will have a great grasp on because they talk to potential students and candidates. And so if the marketing team is not plugged into the admissions team and they're not sharing this information, and then the web team is not translating that into FAQs on the website, then I think there is their opportunity there for them to address that. The other minor but quite a useful thing to have, particularly around forms and conversion, is to have some real-time validation. So, it's a science almost on how you can actually design a form and have these micro interactions that will ensure better conversions and also ensure that the data is accurate as in when you're collecting it. And all the basic things you can do is validate that data as and when it is being entered. Make sure the email ID is valid and they're filling up all the necessary fields, etc. And you can do this real time, right? Not let them fill up the entire form and when they're hitting submit, it says form field 2 and field 6 have errors. And then you have to go scroll back up and then figure out, okay, what are these errors actually? Because the page is not telling me how I should input this information. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into how the forms are designed and how it's implemented. So I think this is, I wouldn't say a low-hanging fruit, but because it does require a little bit of thought and effort to implement it, but definitely something that the admissions teams and the marketing and web teams need to pay attention to. The other is mobile performance. Again, while we don't have the Google Analytics data for all of these websites, it's fair to assume that a lot of the traffic to these websites are coming from mobile. And so mobile performance becomes very important, particularly on the admission pages. And so that is something that we saw show up in our technical analysis where the mobile performance seemed to be lower than desktop performance, particularly for admission pages. The other thing that we noticed is that there are multiple portals for universities, and they might also have admissions portals. And if you have multiple campuses, ensuring that there's clear labeling and navigation for people to go between these different microsites back and forth, not just one way, is also, I think, very, very important. So these are the two things that we found missing: fees and eligibility information being easily found, not enough FAQs, forms can be better, mobile performance for admissions pages should be looked at, and the user experience around how someone navigates from the website to the admissions portal and back, or to different microsites and different portals related to different campuses.
So we also saw a very consistent pattern between private and deemed universities. What explains this gap beyond just resources? Because to me, this isn't about effort, it's about structure and ownership.
My sense is it could be the maturity of the organization, and in particular, how well established the teams are around brand marketing and even the technical know-how within the organization.
So my take on this is that because responsibility is so fragmented, a lot of clarity tends to disappear. And all of this tends to show up in the UX experience. That's the way I sort of see it. Now, just to make things a little practical in terms of, what to do next. If a university listening today wanted to act in the next 90 days, where should they start?
I think, well, one, they can certainly get specific insights about their university, because we have profiles for each university and we have a report card for each university that gives a score and identifies loopholes and things that they can improve. If any of the audience listening in is from any of these universities, and you can search, we'll have this interactive portal up on our website where you can look for university, and if it's there, you can look at it specifically and see how you're doing versus your competitors and what are the areas for improvement. And you can download all of these reports as well if you'd like. But where they can start, I think, like always, when we work with clients, we always start with an audit. And there's no single rule for everyone, but based on what your organization's priorities are, you look at that, but also look at what are things that you can easily address, low-hanging fruits. For example, the university that we are currently working with, they had a lot of such low-hanging fruits that we tackled in the first 3 months of our engagement, which involved essentially optimizing their images from a performance and SEO standpoint. And we were able to do that, by the way, with a custom built AI tool. Yeah, I think an audit and then mapping out the low hanging fruits based on effort, but will have a big impact on your visibility, your SEO, user experience around admissions. I think those can be looked at. And then from an organization's point of view, admissions are always top priority. So, the things that we've talked about today, the gaps that we've noticed in our research will apply to almost all the universities. So even if you're scoring well on this in our study, there are still areas where they can look at, how they can improve further, whether it comes to providing information easily and quickly, ensuring that the navigation between the different portals and microsites are better. The information architecture, I think, is where a lot of this comes from. And often the messiness, the lack of clarity, the difficult navigation, the complex navigation often arises because not enough thought has been put into the information architecture. This is essentially the tree structure or the sitemap that you can actually document and have clarity on, and not just simply add pages as and when the need arises, but add a page by first asking where it fits into the architecture and how it fits in, keeping in mind how deep is it, how many clicks are required, etc. So yeah, this is where, again, if there is not enough internal know-how about how to do these things, then the universities often tend to struggle.
So I want to call out what's important here. Notice how none of these require a rebrand, they require focus. The report that we have also shows that some of these fixes take time. So, what should universities stop expecting to solve in one quarter?
I think looking at just performance is one area which you can fix in the short term to a certain extent. When I say performance, I mean the website performance, the technical performance, or at least certain aspects of it. But over a long term, I think um, looking at search results, visibility, etc. And there are KPIs and for how to measure this. Like we said earlier, these things are volatile because of how much change that is currently happening in the search landscape because of AI. It's almost like stock market results. If you're in it for the long term, you're not going to be too worried about the quarterly results, but you want to see the long term trend. And from a brand visibility standpoint, I think that's what universities need to focus on the long term. How do universities look at showing up more on the surface area versus obsessing about just one or two spots? And that takes consistent long-term effort to be also able to continuously adapt your tactics because things are changing so rapidly. Like we mentioned earlier, the education portals like directories and blogs would show up, but today a lot of them don't show up in the top 10. So if that was a significant part of your online strategy to partner with some of these websites, then you might want to rethink that now. So I think marketing teams need to be agile, keep an eye on the short-term needs, which could be performance, which could be the form optimization that will improve conversions, things like that. But in the long term, look at how you're showing up across all of these different places and then work towards building a strong foundation that will ensure that you can adapt quickly to whatever changes in technology that might come across.
That's the honest truth, right? Some things aren't content tasks, they're governance tasks. Who owns admissions content? Who updates it? How often? Where does the truth live? You can't outsource clarity if the institution doesn't own it. So I want to close with this. The digital divide we saw in this research isn't just about content volume, it reflects institutional maturity, governance, and willingness to invest in clarity, not just campaigns. We're publishing highlights from this research because we want the sector to see patterns and learn from them. Beyond that, institutions can access a university specific diagnosis that shows where you stand, where you leak intent, and what fix needs to be addressed first. This isn't about ranking universities, essentially about helping them compete honestly and intelligently in a far more crowded future. So, Sandeep, final two questions. If a vice chancellor listens to this entire episode and does one thing next week, what should it be?
Yeah, I think, like we talked about admissions, given how important it is commercially, I think that could be a place where they make updates to the fees, the eligibility, and key information around admissions to be accessible in one click or less from a programs page. If somebody is on a programs page, can they access this quickly? And then look at the forms. How do you make that the form submission, the form filling out process, etc., a lot more smoother? What are the little tweaks that you can do? And these small, visible changes done together will compound and then have a impact. So they can start here with these two things, and then of course an audit of their online presence and their website will certainly help them map out the things that they can do over the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months.
And if you're speaking to the executors, the digital and website teams, what's the one change they can make to push through this week that will immediately remove friction?
I think forms again is a great place because it could become a bottleneck. So that's a place that they can look at and address. SEO often tends to be sort of more long term, but a factor that influences that is the website performance. So that's another area that they can easily run a test on using any of the free tools available to see what are some of the opportunities there for them to optimize, particularly the admissions pages.
So that's the episode. Thanks for listening. If you would like access to the report and analysis that we have put together, you can reach out to us at thrivematic.com and we will share it with you. If you would like a custom report for your university specifically, you can also get access to that on thrivematic.com. If you're an institution that's looking to do an audit of your website, in-depth audit and analysis of what can be done and what you need to correct, that's also something that will be available on our website at thrivematic.com. Thanks for listening.